When I was 15, I had an experience after school that truly scared me. I was in my last class of the day and had a habit of always finding ways to get out of class early. I would finish all my work and then some and get a pass to the library. My teachers all liked me and trusted me. I went to the library most of the time, but this time I just took the note, decided not to go, and went downstairs to wait for my friend Ashley. I was waiting inside the school round, as everyone called it, where students would hang out before and after school. I was sitting on one of the benches, organizing papers and whatnot. No one else was around because everyone was still in class. All of a sudden, an acquaintance of mine, Ian, started walking towards me. He had a friend with him, but I didn't know him. Ian, Ashley, and I would sometimes ride the same bus together. We would talk and goof off, but I didn't know him all that well. I remember he always wore black with a black trench coat, but that doesn't really matter because a lot of goth kids did that. So Ian and his friend came up to me and started talking. We were just normally talking, but then I remembered I needed to go get something from my locker. I told Ian I had to go and would see him later. As I started to get up, he stood over me, blocking me from getting up. He said, "You're not going anywhere until I ask you something first." I wasn't afraid at this point because I just thought he was playing around. I asked him what it was that he wanted to ask me, and he said that he wanted me to go with him to the Winter Wonder Ball coming up. I told him I wasn't planning on going at all because I'm not into those things. So I stood up anyway, which made me get directly in front of him, and I sidestepped him to get some distance. He then grabbed both of my arms behind my back and held them tightly as he kept saying, "You're going to come with me. I'll make you." At this point, his friend was getting a little nervous and started to tell Ian to back off, that this was going too far. I told Ian to let me go and that I had to leave. He then pinned me up against the wall. He let go of my arms behind my back, then just made me face him while his arms were pinning me there. He started talking to his friend and cracking jokes about what he could do to me while no one's around. He then began to touch my waist with his left hand and slowly moved his hand up to touch my breast. I was very scared at this point, but I was trying not to show it because I didn't want it to escalate or make him mad. I told him to let me go, and I looked at his friend. His friend had pity on me and sternly told Ian to let me go. He came up and pried him off of me. As I began walking away, Ian tried to grab my arm again, but I kept dodging his grasp until the teacher rounded a corner and began to walk towards us. That was enough to get him to stop. As I was walking faster away from him, I heard him call out, "I will see you soon, babe." I rushed out of the building and got on a different bus to avoid seeing him. My heart was beating so fast. I was also shocked and confused about what just happened. After that incident, I never talked to him again. He would avoid taking the bus and avoided all of the places he knew I'd be, which was perfectly fine by me. I also found out that shortly after the incident, he got heavily involved in drugs and alcohol and beat up his stepmom. I talked to him last year on Facebook, but I ended up blocking him because he began saying perverted comments to me and started asking me out. No thank you. So, high school creep who pinned me down, let's never meet again.
This isn't a tale of being stalked really, but it was scary at the time. This happened, I think, in sophomore year, or junior year. It was a long time ago, so I can't remember what grade. The high school I went to was one of the worst in the state. Wannabe gang members, violence, etc. I was heading to the lunchroom one day, and a guy that I didn't really know that well started chatting with me. I didn't have any classes with him, but I had seen him around, talked to him a few times, and he seemed nice. As we were walking and talking, he asks me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I told him no, as politely as I could, as I had a boyfriend at the time, but he had dropped out after my freshman year. He asked me, nicely, if it was because he was black. I told him no, and that if I didn't have a boyfriend, we could totally try. He was really cute. Not like muscular or anything, but short, stocky, with cute chubby cheeks. Anyway, we changed the subject and he took off to class, and I thought nothing more of it. The next day I woke up feeling like absolute shit. Fever and stomach ache, so no school for me. The following day I felt much better, so I headed into school. One of my friends came over and sat next to me while I was eating breakfast and filled me in on what happened the day before. Turns out the dude that asked me out brought a gun in his backpack. He and the girl telling me this were friends as well. He had asked her if he could use her locker because he couldn't get his open and was in a rush. She let him, since most of us keep our lockers unlocked anyway because we hardly ever use them. But they did a locker check that day and found a gun in his backpack, in her locker. Both of them were taken to the office, and she had to tell them what had happened with him using her locker. She was in tears because she thought she was going to end up suspended, and she was a straight A student. She somehow didn't get into trouble, but was told to keep a lock on her locker from now on. The boy was expelled. I'm not sure what happened to him afterwards. Now you may think, so doesn't have anything to do with you. A lot of people bring weapons to school, and that's exactly what I thought. Until I opened my locker to see a note signed by him that made my blood run cold. I'm sorry for what might happen. Now, this still doesn't mean that any of those bullets were meant for me, but it certainly creeped me the hell out. I think back on it now, and I just wonder what he was planning on doing, if anything, with that gun.
My biggest mistake in high school was agreeing to take an AP physics class with the seniors. I was a rising sophomore at the time, so when I walked into a class with kids much older than I was, my teacher sat me next to the only other person there that was close to my age. He was a freshman, and his name was Josh. Josh was one of those people who gave off weird vibes. He had a sloppily shaven head, empty eyes, and ate warm Skittles in class. He was short, but mean-looking, and the instant I sat down next to him, my teacher ordered us to exchange numbers and tried to make us start talking. For some reason, I really did not want to talk to him. I wasn't trying to be an asshole, but he just scared me. Sitting next to him felt like what I can only describe as sitting next to a hungry dog while you're holding a piece of chicken. It felt like any second he would jump on me, even though he was a good 6 inches shorter than me. It really freaked me out that he had my phone number and name. Even though I didn't know anything about the kid, I had a feeling that him knowing literally anything about me was not good. Luckily, he didn't talk to me for over a week, and after some time, I thought I was just being overly judgmental, and he was just a socially awkward kid. One day, about 3 weeks later, I started the class with him and he talked to me. He asked me something like, "You're the girl that drives the F-150, right?" And I reluctantly said, "Yeah." He then told me that cars were a hobby of his, and he had seen me driving and liked my truck. Although I was caught a bit off guard, he seemed innocent and nice, and we kind of became friends after that. He started texting me a lot after school, asking me a bit about myself and sharing a bit about himself too. Like I said, the kid seemed innocent, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't be telling him anything about myself, and I should not be talking to him. The average conversation continued for a month or so, until one day when I came home from work. I worked at a restaurant about 20 minutes away from my house, so when I turned off my phone to drive to work, I honestly wouldn't turn it back on until I drove back home, as phones were prohibited at the restaurant. One weekend, I came home at 12 a.m. after doing closing shift, and he sent me several odd texts. They all consisted of, "I love you, I want to take you to homecoming, and be my girlfriend." He didn't seem to really be asking much, as he was demanding me to have a relationship with him that I wasn't comfortable with. I ultimately friend-zoned him and told him I was going to bed. His response was, "No, just no." It freaked me the F out and made me really not want to go to class on Monday, but I had no choice. I had to go. He didn't text me for the rest of the weekend, and when I sulked into class on Monday, he gave me the same hungry dog stare from day one, and I ignored him the whole class. I practically ran away when the bell rang. When I got to my car in the student parking lot, I saw him watch me drive away from the sidewalk. It freaked me out more than I'd like to admit, so I called one of my guy friends and asked him if I could drive him home from school. He agreed, and we made an arrangement there and then. A lot of people thought I was overreacting, but I just knew in my gut that I needed someone in the car with me, and this guy friend seemed like the right one. When I came home from work at 10ish Monday night, I opened my phone and saw more texts from Josh. This time, they were much more predatory than the night before, as that night, they were detailing how he would like me to perform sexual acts on him. I foolishly allowed this to happen for another couple weeks, still feeling uncomfortable in class when it finally hit a breaking point. Josh started sending me texts about how if I wouldn't love him, he had to die. At that point, I decided it was time to involve the dean, but she did virtually nothing. She basically explained that Josh was special needs and had to cut him some slack, despite the predatory tone of the messages. She told me she would talk to him about it, but not to be worried because he likely wouldn't do anything. I was infuriated and told my dad, who told his army of Italian brothers who all decided to keep an eye on him. The creepy messages didn't get any worse and eventually stopped after I blocked his number. That was when the really creepy stuff started. The cameras outside our house kept picking up a person at night, someone very similar looking to Josh. This person kept knocking on the windows and looking in my car, so my dad called the cops, who were actually awesome, and kept a lookout on the house for a while to deter the nightly visits. With a cop outside at night, the visits stopped and my work started getting calls from Josh asking when I was working. My manager ended up alerting the security, who threatened him to stop calling. Then Josh decided to start frequently going to the restaurant where I worked every day and leave paper cranes on the table saying, "I love you," and "Your new boyfriend isn't good for you. I am." He started following me to class, to my car, to work, even though I pretended he wasn't there, and was still driving my 6'3" guy friend home. I refused to leave my house without a group of people, debating skipping prom, and became a hermit because he made me feel so unsafe anywhere. Eventually, my dad decided a restraining order would be a good idea, and I did get one granted so he couldn't walk near me or contact me for 5 years. Thankfully, this finally caused the year-long nightmare to stop. I didn't see Josh again until my senior year, when I was walking down the hall with my friends and he saw me coming, stopped in his tracks, and slowly watched me walk past him with that same hungry dog look that initially scared me the day I met him. You're probably wondering why he never got in any trouble when I contacted the dean and the police. Well, where I live, there's a bunch of laws that make it exponentially harder for someone with special needs to be punished for creepy behavior, even though they're just as capable to execute their behavior than the average person. The last time I saw Josh was on graduation, when I could have sworn he was in the front rows waiting for me to get my diploma. Although it's possible he was there for someone else, a part of me knows he was there for me. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, is that this can happen to anyone. I never thought that this would happen to me until it did, and it robbed me of my safety, high school experience, and a peace of mind. Always trust your instincts on someone. You are not required to be nice to anyone who makes you uncomfortable. That leads me to now. I'm happy. I'm in a serious relationship with an awesome guy, and in a weird way, I'm glad I was able to learn from this whole experience. So, Josh from AP Physics, let's never meet again.
Hi, for the record, I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and I'm also from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 years old, and just got into my junior year, I created my first Twitter account, and I deleted it because of this story. Some information. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me were on the account, and as location, I said Paris, because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people either, so my timeline was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me quite a strange direct message. It was a 200 followers account, and the message was, "Hi, my name's Rob. I just turned 17 and I wanted to know if you live in Redacted because I will soon move into that town and I'll go to the town high school and I'm looking for friends. The thing I redacted was obviously the name of the town I lived in. I immediately thought that something was wrong because there was no way on my profile I said where I actually lived. But after some thinking, I remembered a tweet I made a few weeks ago about buses and I mentioned the city. So I told myself he just looked up the name of my hometown and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored and he was polite, so I answered him. I told him I indeed lived in that town and I go to the high school that he was planning on going to. The discussion was natural and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food in the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions, like, do you live far away from the school? In a house or an apartment? Do you live with both of your parents? Oh, there's 5 of you, so you're not often home alone, right? I never answered because it was a bit too shady for me, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, the same thing. We talked a lot. And he was still asking personal questions to know me better. I asked some too. He always answered my questions with what seemed like honesty. I didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't need to know that. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed, because I was bullied for years, and even today, I developed strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France in October, we have a 2 weeks long vacation, and the day before we went back to school, he finally told me that he was coming to my high school, because he finally moved in with his mum. He asked me to name a place for us to meet, so we could hang out during morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him, and I told him to join me in the hall, but when he understood that there would be people around, he said he would prefer an isolated place. He said this because he thought he wouldn't be able to instantly recognize me because we'd only met online, and he didn't want to spend the whole break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom, because we weren't allowed to stay in there during breaks, and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still at school, so I thought nothing could happen to me. On the first day back at school, I made myself look pretty. I wore my best clothes. I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited for him. And when he arrived, it was him. It wasn't a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture, but I noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought he looked about 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot. We got on really well. I was so pleased at the end of the break, and he asked me to go for fast food with him at lunchtime. I said no because I didn't have any money and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed, but he offered to walk me home after classes. I explained that I have to take the bus, but he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We'd meet in the 3rd floor bathroom during morning break, and he would walk me to the bus stop after my classes. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways nor the cafeteria, but I thought at the time the building was huge. There was over 1,500 students there. So if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way that we could meet each other, I thought. That evening he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got on the bus, waved at him, put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 5:45 in December, so it was already really dark out. As I got off of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was just a very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach. I felt like I was being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but I kept my earphones in, so that people thought I couldn't hear anything. And that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the roads that the bus passed on. When I heard footsteps behind me, I knew that I was right, and I knew that someone was following me. At least I could hear that the footsteps were not gaining on me. They weren't trying to catch me up, if you know what I mean. But I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I reached for my keys in my pocket, and I finally pulled them out. I ran. as fast as I could, the best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open the door, close it before whoever was following me could reach me, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone, and I took a look through the glass panel on the door. It's not a peephole, it's a whole window, so if someone wants to see what's happening inside, they can. It was Rob. He was only a few meters away from me, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably by car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute. When I took back control over my body, I ran to the kitchen to get a knife and went back to the door. There he was, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't. In that moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break, he was kicking harder and harder. The minutes felt like hours. After about 5 minutes, he stopped, and then he went around the house. He was knocking against every shutter until he eventually reached the back door. He looked very angry. Then my neighbor's car pulled into his drive, and Rob ran away, probably thinking it was my mum coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me thousands of messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought that would be the end of this story. But then a whole bunch of new accounts I hadn't seen before started following me. Their @ was a series of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I hadn't seen him at school. Not a single one ever heard of Rob. This guy was never a student at my high school. And that's why I never met him apart from on our daily meetings. And this is probably why he seems so old. Since I haven't heard anyone mention his name, I'm still asking myself, what did he want? And what could have happened to me that night? So Rob, let's never meet again.
I've experienced my fair share of creeps in high school, but there are two people in particular that stand out. I'll be referring to the first creep as Clarence and the second as Michael. I should preface this by saying that these two have creeped me out numerous times, and I'll refer to the worst of their offenses as the incidences. Incident 1. In my freshman year of high school, a girl in my choir class introduced me to her friend named Clarence. When I met him, he said that I would make a great specimen to be dissected in his basement. When I was understandably horrified, he followed up with, "Haha, I was just joking." Sure you were, buddy. I didn't talk to him very much after that. He tried to be buddy-buddy with me, and he kept trying to arrange days to hang out, but it was not happening. I was not comfortable hanging with the same guy who made a joke about dissecting me. Incident 2. The girl who introduced me to him gave him my Facebook, and he messaged me. I tried to ignore him, but he was one of those types who would message you every 6 seconds if you didn't respond immediately, so I eventually gave in. Big mistake. He came out to me as bi and confessed his feelings for me. I politely rejected him and told him that I had a boyfriend who I was happy with. I ended the conversation and went to sleep. I got a message from him overnight and was disgusted when I read it the next morning. It was a message of him describing all the things he wanted to do to me sexually that he ended with, "Please don't tell anyone." I immediately blocked him. Incident 3. After blocking him, he made a fake account trying to contact me. His fake name wasn't very different from his real name, so I knew it was him. I tried to tell him for the last time that I didn't want to talk to him and that I'd be blocking him again. He tried to pull the, "If you don't respond, then I'll kill myself." And the conversation devolved into him making jokes about taking advantage of me. And when I confronted him, he pulled the, "It's just a prank, bro," bullcrap. I blocked him again and haven't heard from or about him since. Moving on to the bigger creep, Michael. I met him at my bus stop at the beginning of 8th grade year. As soon as I met him, he seemed kind of off. He was extremely annoying and clingy, like I just met him and he was acting like we'd been friends since kindergarten or something. I tried to ignore him, but what few interactions I did have with him were pretty bad. I should preface this next part by saying, like Clarence, he would try to come over to hang out and arrange sleepovers that never happened. This will all make sense soon. Incident 1. My best friend and I were walking home from the bus stop, and Michael decided to tag along. He tried to awkwardly start conversations and tried to pull the "we should hang out" nonsense, and I came up with even more nonsensical excuses. We eventually parted ways, and I continued my walk home. Once I turned onto my street, I heard footsteps and turned around out of sheer curiosity, and it was Michael. I confronted him and asked why he was following me, and his excuse was, "Oh, I was just trying to go to the store." "Oh, the store? You mean the same store that's a mile in the opposite direction of my house?" I lived in what was basically a cul-de-sac, so there was nothing ahead of us but houses. I told him to leave. He awkwardly turned around and walked in the direction of the store to make it look like he wasn't following me. I'm glad I caught him before he saw exactly which house I lived in. Incident 2. I was on the bus one morning and my best friend was running late, so he wasn't sitting next to me. So of course, Mr. Michael decides to plop down in the seat next to me without asking to sit there like we were actually friends. I pay him no mind until he taps me on the shoulder and says he has something to show me. My curiosity turned to absolute disgust when he showed me the gay porn that I assumed he had been jerking it to the night before. It got worse when he admitted that he was gay and had feelings for me. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay. I'm bisexual myself, but Michael went about it in all the wrong ways. It got even worse when he admitted that the reason he wanted to spend the night with me so badly was because he wanted to seduce me. I was super in the closet, and like most 14-year-old boys, I was convinced that I was the most heterosexual man on earth. So the only way I knew how to react was with pure, unbridled disgust. I didn't talk to him after that and tried my hardest to avoid him as much as humanly possible. Incident 3. About a year after the bus incident, I was at home watching YouTube when suddenly someone was knocking on the door. The knocks lasted about 30 to 45 seconds, and they got louder and more frequent in between each knock. I assumed it was someone who didn't realize that they were at the wrong house, so I brushed it off. A few minutes later, my mom comes in and asks me, "Hey, do you know the kid who wouldn't stop knocking on our door?" I looked out my blinds and guess who I saw? Freaking Michael. My mom has a very strict rule about not answering the door for strangers and said that when she didn't answer the door, he started pacing up and down our street for about 5 minutes before she asked if I knew him. I told her that he was a stalker and not to let him in. I'm really glad that her cautiousness around strangers didn't allow her to answer the door for him because I did not want Michael knowing where I live. Ever. This last story is a bonus and only consists of one incident because this kid really was a stranger. I didn't even know his name, so I guess I'll call him Homeboy. I didn't include this story in the title since I met him after high school. So, when I graduated high school, my mom sent me to live with my grandmother in a bigger city since there were more job opportunities. My grandmother had a neighbor across the street with a grandson around my age and suggested I should try to make friends with him, and I did. We decided to try and arrange a day to hang out. About 2 months go by and we haven't actually hung out yet. I tried making plans, but he didn't respond very often. When he did, he'd insist on hanging out at his house while his grandmother's at work, which I'm not comfortable with since I don't know him. Finally, in August, he invites me to hang out with him at a park at around 10:30 p.m. I should note that we live in a mobile home park with its own park. That's the only reason I was comfortable with it. Otherwise, I would have insisted on another time. When we get to the park, he pulls out a baggie of weed and offers to let me try. I agree because I was intrigued. After a few hits, I am completely baked, and I know it. When I'm sober, I usually talk quickly and can barely be understood, so I knew I was high when I was talking slowly. What I was saying was more concise, and I was pausing or saying in between words more than I usually do. So after about 4 or 5 hits, I'm completely stoned and mentioned how calm I am. I made a joke about being dead on the inside and not feeling anything, Then suddenly homeboy grabs me by my crotch and says, in the creepiest and deepest tone possible, "I can fix that." I pushed him away and awkwardly laughed. Then he insisted on doing something called a shotgun. It's where you blow weed into someone's mouth, and when he tried to demonstrate, he leaned in like he was trying to kiss me before I shoved him away again. The final straw was him trying to get me to promise to hook up with him if me and my boyfriend don't work out. I was uncomfortable and decided it was time to go, and he walked me home. He asked me if I would ever consider going down on him, and I ignored the question and just tried to change the topic. When I got home, I told all my loved ones, and I blocked homeboy on Instagram. It's been 2 months, and I haven't seen or heard from him. I think he's moved out of the neighborhood, so I don't have to worry about him anymore. When I told my best friend, she told me that weed can be used as a muscle relaxant, and that he was planning to get me so high that my body couldn't react when he made his advances. It made sense because he kept insisting that I do one last hit before we left, and I said no because I didn't want to smell like weed when I came home. I haven't spoken to any of these people since the incidences that occurred, and I've blocked them all on social media. I have no plans of contacting them in the future and want nothing to do with them. So, to the creepy dudes from high school and homeboy who tried to take advantage of me in a park, let's never meet again.